my darling, and welcome to today's story time. If you like what you hear, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And now, on with our story time. Moreau had published some very astonishing facts in connection with the transfusion of blood, and in addition, was known to be doing valuable work on morbid growths. Then suddenly, his career was over. He had to leave England. A journalist obtained access to his laboratory in the capacity of a laboratory assistant, with a deliberate intention of making sensational exposures. And by the help of a shocking accident, if indeed it was an accident, his gruesome pamphlet became notorious. On the day of its publication, a wretched dog, flayed and otherwise mutilated, escaped from Moreau's house. It was in the silly season, and a prominent editor, a cousin of the temporary laboratory assistant, appealed to the conscience of the nation. It was not the first time that conscience has turned against the methods of research. The doctor was simply howled out of the country. It may be that he deserved to be, but I still think that the tepid support of his fellow investigators and his desertion by the great body of scientific workers was a shameful thing. Yet some of his experiments, by the journalist's account, were wantonly cruel. He might perhaps have purchased his social peace by abandoning his investigations, but he apparently preferred the latter, as most men would who have fallen under the overmastering spell of research. He was unmarried, and indeed nothing but his own interests were left to consider. I felt convinced that this must be the same man. Everything pointed to it. It dawned upon me to what end the puma and the other animals, which had now been brought with other luggage into the enclosure behind the house, were destined. And a curious, faint odor, the halitus of something familiar, an odor that had been in the background of my consciousness hitherto, suddenly came forward into the forefront of my thoughts. It was the antiseptic odor of the dissecting room. I heard the puma growling through the wall, and one of the dogs yelped as though it had been struck. Yet surely, and especially to another scientific man, there was nothing so horrible in vivisection as to account for this secrecy. And by some odd leap in my thoughts, the pointed ears and luminous eyes of Montgomery's attendant came back again before me in the sharpest definition. I stared before me out at the green sea, frothing under a freshening breeze, and let these and other strange memories of the last few days chase one another through my mind. What could it all mean? A locked enclosure on a lonely island, a notorious vivisector, and these crippled and distorted men. Montgomery interrupted my tangle of mystification and suspicion about 1 o'clock, and his grotesque attendant followed him with a tray bearing bread, some herbs and other eatables, a flask of whiskey, a jug of water, and 3 glasses and knives. I glanced askance at this strange creature and found him watching me with his strange, restless eyes. Montgomery said he would lunch with me, but that Moreau was too preoccupied with some work to come. Moreau, I said. I know that name. The devil you do, said he. What an ass I was to mention it to you. I might have thought. Anyhow, it will give you an inkling of our mysteries. Whiskey? No thanks, I said. I'm an abstainer. Oh, I wish I had been, but it's no use locking the door after the steed is stolen. It was that infernal stuff which led to my coming here, that and a foggy night. I thought myself in luck at the time when Moreau offered to get me off. It's strange. Montgomery, I said suddenly, as the outer door closed. Why has your man pointed ears? What? He said, over his first mouthful of food. He stared at me for a moment, and then he repeated, pointed ears. Little points to them, I said, as calmly as possible, with a catch at my breath, and a little fine tuft of black fur at the edges. He helped himself to whiskey and water with great deliberation. I was under the impression that his hair covered his ears. No, I said. I saw them as he stooped by me to put that coffee you sent to me on my table, and his eyes shine in the dark. By this time, Montgomery had recovered from the surprise of my question. I always thought, he said deliberately, with a certain accentuation of his flavoring of lisp, that there was something the matter with his ears, from the way he covered them. What were they like? I was persuaded from his manner that this ignorance was a pretense. Still, I could hardly tell the man that I thought him a liar. Pointed, I said, rather small and furry, distinctly furry. But the whole man is one of the strangest beings I've ever set eyes upon. Suddenly, a sharp, hoarse cry of animal pain came from the enclosure behind us. Its depth and volume testified to the puma. I saw Montgomery wince. Yes, he said. Where did you pick up the creature? San Francisco, he responded. He's an ugly brute, I admit. Half-witted, you know. Can't remember where he came from. But I'm used to him, you know. We both are. How does he strike you? He's unnatural, I said. There's something about him. Don't think me fanciful, but it gives me a strange sensation, a tightening of my muscles when he comes near me. It's a touch of the supernatural, I think. Montgomery had stopped eating while I told him this. Rum, he said. I can't see it. He resumed his meal. I have no idea about that, he said as he chewed. The crew of this schooner must have felt the same. Made a dead set at the poor devil. You saw the captain. Suddenly the puma howled again, this time more painfully. Montgomery swore under his breath. I had half a mind to attack him about the men on the beach. Then the poor brute within gave vent to a series of short, sharp cries. Your men on the beach, I said. What race are they? Excellent fellows, aren't they? He answered, absent-mindedly, knitting his brows as the animal yelled out sharply again. I said no more. There was another outcry worse than the former. He looked at me with dull gray eyes, and then took some more whiskey. He tried to draw me into a discussion about alcohol, professing to have saved my life with it. He seemed anxious to lay stress on the fact that I owed my life to him. I answered him distractedly. Presently our meal came to an end. The misshapen monster with the pointed ears cleared the remains away, and Montgomery left me alone in the room again. All the time, he had been in a state of ill-conceived irritation at the noise of the vivisected puma. He had spoken of his odd want of nerve, and left me to the obvious application. I found myself that the cries were singularly irritating, that they grew in depth and intensity as the afternoon wore on. They were painful at first, but their constant resurgence at last altogether upset my balance. I flung aside a crib of Horace I had been reading, and began to clench my fists, to bite my lips, and to pace the room. Presently, I pressed my fingers against my ears. The emotional appeal of those yells grew upon me steadily, grew at last to such an exquisite expression of suffering that I could stand it in that confined room no longer. I stepped out of the door into the slumberous heat of the late afternoon, and walking past the main entrance, locked again, I noticed, turned the corner of the wall. The crying sounded even louder out of doors. It was as if all of the pain in the world had found a voice. Yet had I known such pain was in the next room, and had it been dumb, I believe, I have thought since, I could have stood it well enough. It is when suffering finds a voice and sets our nerves quivering that this pity comes troubling us. But in spite of the brilliant sunlight and the green fans of the trees waving in the soothing sea breeze, the world was a confusion, blurred with drifting black and red phantasms, until I was out of earshot of the house in the checkered wall. I strode through the undergrowth that clothed the ridge behind the house, scarcely heeding hither where I went. I passed on through the shadow of a thick cluster of straight-stemmed trees beyond it, and so presently found myself some way on the other side of the ridge, and descending towards a streamlet that ran through a narrow valley. I paused and listened. The distance I had come, or the intervening masses of thicket, deadened any sound that might be coming from the enclosure. The air was still. Then with a rustle, a rabbit emerged and went scampering up the slope before me. I hesitated and sat down in the edge of the shade. This place was a pleasant one. The rivulet was hidden by the luxuriant vegetation of the banks, save at one point, where I caught a triangular patch of its glittering water. On the farther side, I saw through a bluish haze a tangle of trees and creepers, and above these again, the luminous blue of the sky. Here and there, a splash of white or crimson marked the blooming of some trailing epiphyte. I let my eyes wander over the scene for a while, and then began to turn over in my mind again the strange peculiarities of Montgomery's man. But it was too hot to think elaborately, and presently I fell into a tranquil state midway between dozing and waking. From this I was aroused, after I know not how long, by a rustling amidst the greenery on the other side of the stream. For a moment, I could see nothing but the wavering summits of the ferns and reeds. Then suddenly, upon the bank of the stream appeared something. At first I could not distinguish what it was. It bowed its round head to the water and began to drink. Then I saw it was a man, going on all fours like a beast. He was clothed in bluish cloth, and was of a copper-colored hue with black hair. It seemed that grotesque ugliness was an invariable character of these islanders. I could hear the suck of the water at his lips as he drank. I leant forward to see him better, and a piece of lava, detached by my hand, went pattering down the slope. He looked up guiltily, and his eyes met mine. Forthwith, he scrambled to his feet and stood wiping his clumsy hand across his mouth, regarding me. His legs were scarcely half the length of his body. So, staring one another out of countenance, we remained for perhaps the space of 1 minute. Then, stopping to look back once or twice, he slunk off among the bushes to the right of me, and I heard the swish of the fronds grow faint in the distance and die away. Long after he had disappeared, I remained sitting up staring in the direction of his retreat. My drowsy tranquility had gone. I was startled by a noise behind me, and turning suddenly, saw the flapping white tail of a rabbit vanishing up the slope. I jumped to my feet. The apparition of this grotesque, half-bestial creature had suddenly populated the stillness of the afternoon for me. I looked around me rather nervously and regretted that I was unarmed. Then I thought that the man I had just seen had been clothed in bluish cloth, had not been naked as a savage would have been, I would assume, and I tried to persuade myself from the fact that he was, after all, probably a peaceful character, that his animal movements and the dull ferocity of his countenance bellied him. Yet I was greatly disturbed at the apparition. I walked to the left along the slope, turning my head about and peering this way and that among the straight stems of the trees. Why should a man go on all fours and drink with his lips? Presently, I heard an animal wailing again. Taking it to be the puma, I turned about and walked in a direction diametrically opposite to the sound. This led me down to the stream, across which I stepped and pushed my way up through the undergrowth beyond. I was startled by a great patch of vivid scarlet on the ground, and going up to it, found it to be a peculiar fungus, branched and corrugated like a foliaceous lichen, but deliquescing into slime at the touch. And then in the shadow of some luxuriant ferns, I came upon an unpleasant thing. The dead body of a rabbit, covered with shining flies, but still warm and with the head torn off. I stopped, aghast, at the sight of the scattered blood. Here at least was one visitor to the island now disposed of. There were no traces of other violence about it. It looked as though it had suddenly been snatched up and killed. And as I stared at the little furry body, came the difficulty of how the thing had been done. The vague dread that had been in my mind since I had seen the inhuman face of the man at the stream grew distincter as I stood there. I began to realize the hardihood of my expedition among these unknown people. The thicket about me became altered to my imagination. Every shadow became something more than a shadow, became an ambush. Every rustle became a threat. Invisible things seemed watching me. I resolved to go back to the enclosure on the beach. I turned away suddenly and thrust myself violently, possibly even frantically, through the bushes, anxious to get a clear space about me again. I stopped just in time to prevent myself emerging upon an open space. It was kind of a glade in the forest, made by a fall. Seedlings were already starting to struggle up for the vacant space, and beyond, the dense growth of stems and twining vines and splashes of fungus and flowers closed in again. Before me, squatting together upon the fungoid ruins of a huge fallen tree, and still unaware of my approach, were three grotesque human figures. One was evidently a female, the other two were men. They were naked, save for swathings of scarlet cloth about their middles, and their skins were of a dull pinkish drab color, such as I have never seen in a savage before. They had fat, heavy, chinless faces, retreating foreheads, and a scant, bristly hair upon their heads. I had never seen such animal-looking men. They were talking, or at least one of the men was talking to the other two, and all three had been too closely interested to heed the rustling of my approach. They swayed their heads and shoulders from side to side. The speaker's words came thick and sloppy, and though I could hear him distinctly, I could not distinguish what he said. He seemed to me to be reciting some complicated gibberish. Presently, his articulation became shriller, and spreading his hands, he rose to his feet. At that, the others began to gibber in unison, also rising to their feet, spreading their hands, and swaying their bodies in rhythm with their chant. I noticed then the abnormal shortness of their legs and their lank, clumsy feet. All three began to circle slowly around, raising and stamping their feet and waving their arms. A kind of tune crept into their rhythmic recitation, and a refrain, balula or balula, it sounded like. Their eyes began to sparkle, and their ugly faces to brighten with an expression of strange pleasure. Saliva dripped from their lipless mouths. As I watched their grotesque and unaccountable gestures, I perceived clearly, for the first time, what it was that had offended me, what had given me the two inconsistent and conflicting impressions of utter strangeness, and yet of the strangest familiarity. The three creatures engaged in this mysterious rite were human in shape, and yet human beings with the strangest air about them of some familiar animal. Each of these creatures, despite its human form, its rag of clothing, and the rough humanity of its bodily form, had woven into it, into its movements, into the expression of its countenance, into its whole presence, some now irresistible suggestion of a hog, a swinish taint, the unmistakable mark of the beast. And this, my darling, ends our story time for today. As always, I hope that you have very sweet and creepy dreams.